למנצח אל שושנים, עדות לאסף מזמור. מורeh ישראל האזינה, נוהג כצאן יוסף, יושב הצורדים הופיע לפני אפרים ובנימין ומנשה, עוררה את גבורתך ולך לישועתה לנו. אלוהים השיבנו, להאיר פניך וניוושע.
Shalom, Chesed, 𝙁𝙗𝙗𝙯, peace, grace, and welcome to the study for this week. Today we're doing something a little bit controversial, and I guess you could say that we always do to some degree, because what is it that we believe? We believe in whom the nations call Jesus, but we call him by his Hebrew name, Yeshua. That doesn't make anyone better than anyone. We just want to get back to the original before things were changed, before things were taken out of context. And in that journey to return to the original teachings of Yeshua, we find that he is a Torah observant Jew, meaning he is a Jew who was faithful to the law of God, to the law of the Father, to the law given through Moses. So the question can be asked, when was the separation between Judaism and what later became Christianity? What people refer to as the parting of ways. A lot of people will refer to Paul and blame Paul based on ignorance or simply because they don't like him. As you study, you come to find out that very intentionally in Galatians chapter 2 and later in Acts 15 and later in Acts 21, years of going through the development of the movement, we see that it is understood that Jacob, who in recent times they've translated as James for some reason, and Peter, who is Kepha, and Yochanan the elder, John the elder disciple, because he outlived everyone, they were focusing the teachings of Yeshua as to the Jewish community, where Paul or Rab Shaul and Barnabas and those who were with them were focusing on, as it says in Acts 21, the Jews who live among the nations and those from the nations who want to know about the God of Israel. So basically assimilated Jews like Timothy, who were mixed with Greek heritage and Greek culture, or just full-blown Greeks like Titus, who were interested in the God of Israel. This was the focus of Paul and his branch of the movement. So they were not in opposition, as is the lie of atheists and people who hate the renewed covenant, who hate the New Testament, or who have an agenda because they belong to some political religious establishment. There was no disagreement at the end. They had disagreements that had to be resolved like every movement, but under the authority and power of Messiah, they were able to reach an understanding. And what we're going to analyze is, why were the Jewish leaders of the Messianic movement eliminated, hunted down, and removed from their positions of leadership? When did this take place? And I'm going to start with Epiphanius, and there's other references that I'm going to mention, such as Jerome. These are whom the nations refer to as the church fathers. And they just so happen to be the people who hated the Jewish community, hated Jerusalem, hated the law of God, and I'm claiming hated the apostles themselves. But you decide for yourself. You've probably been told the Ebionites were wicked. You've probably been told they were heretics. Well, let's see for ourselves. And keep in mind that the information that we have come from their opponents. But it still serves us because the opponents quote them. And they quote their versions of the renewed covenant. And so we could still learn a lot from them and see if that lines up with the renewed covenant. Let's see whose words and the history line up with what's actually written in the renewed covenant. And so starting with Epiphanius and Panarion, this is in the into the 3rd and 4th century. This is already in the period where Constantine is inventing this synchronization of Greek and Roman culture with certain aspects of this Messianic Jewish movement. They're picking and choosing what they want to keep and throwing away what they just don't want to accept. And he goes on to say, in Epiphanius Panarion, in reference to the Nazarenes. Now, we're going to make a distinction between the Ebionites and Nazarenes as these two branches of one movement. Two branches of one movement. Remember, you have the branch of the movement under Jacob, James, and Peter, Kepha, and Yochanan the Elder, John. And then you have the branch of Paul and Barnabas. Two branches. And we're going to understand this as we do a little research. So Epiphanius himself says, everyone called the Christians Nazarenes, as they say in accusing Paul the apostle in Acts 24:5. We have found this man a pestilent fellow and a perverter of the people, a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. So 2 accusations are made against him. He causes problems among the Jewish community, and he's the ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. So the Nazarene branch is already associated with Paul directly from Acts 24:5 and also from the witness of this so-called church father Epiphanius. And the holy apostle did not disclaim the name, not to profess these people's hearsay, but he was glad to own the name his adversary's malice had applied to him for Christ's sake. For he says in court, they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, nor have I done any of those things wherefore they accuse me. But this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call hearsay, so worship I, believing in all things in the law and the prophets, Acts 24:12-13. And no wonder the apostle admitted to being a Nazarene. In those days, everyone called Christians this because of the city of Nazareth. There was no other usage of the name at that time. And so people gave the name of Nazarenes to believers in Christ, of whom it is written, because he shall be called a Nazarene. Matthew 2:23. Epiphanius continues in chapter 9. He says, yet to the Jews, they are very much enemies. Not only do Jewish people bear hatred against them, they even stand up at dawn, at midday, and toward evening, 3 times a day, when they recite their prayers in the synagogues and curse and anathemize them by saying 3 times a day, God cursed the Nazarenes. For they harbor a further grudge against them, if you please, because despite their Jewish origin, they preach that Yeshua is the Messiah, something that is opposite of those who are still Jews and have not accepted Yeshua. They have the gospel according to Matthew in its entirety in Hebrew, for it is clear that they still preserve this as it was originally written in the Hebrew alphabet. So Epiphanius Panarion testifies in that time period where Constantine is eliminating the Jewish leadership. He acknowledges that the Paul branch of the movement were originally called Nazarenes. Now, the Hebrew word for Christian is notzrim. We can translate Christian literally to Hebrew from Greek as meshichim, anointed ones. So it's a little complex because the Greek and Roman translation really reflects the word for anointed, but in Hebrew, we retain this name for Nazarenes, notzrim, which has to do with a guardian of a secret, or also an offshoot branch. So these names have very historical significance to them. So also the reference to the curse 3 times a day is something instituted by a Gentile convert named Akiva, who was a descendant of Sisera, the enemy of Israel. And because the Messianic movement did not accept Gentile converts who denied Messiah as Jews, Akiva was very offended and made it his goal to attack the Messianic movement and have them excommunicated by endorsing someone he probably knew was not the Messiah in the first place. This was a way to excommunicate them. And he also had Shmuel HaKatan compose a curse that already existed, a curse for other groups, such as the Samaritans, the Sadducees, even the Essenes themselves. And he applied it specifically to the Minim and the Notzrim. We're going to talk about the Minim, which is another term for the Ebionim. And the Notzrim are their disciples in the diaspora. Let's go directly to Jerome's commentary on Galatians in the same time period. He says, the holy poor, in reference to Romans chapter 15, the care of whom was especially committed by the Apostle Paul and Barnabas, are Jewish believers. So Jerome is acknowledging that the holy poor, Ebionim HaKedoshim, that are referred to in Romans 15, in Galatians 2, in Corinthians chapters 8 and 9, are the Jewish believers. Jerome is acknowledging this. He goes on to say, as a reference, they lay at the feet of the apostles their most valuable possessions to be distributed to the needy. This is a reference to Acts chapter 4. The letters of the Holy Apostle Paul testify to how much effort he poured into ministering to them as he wrote to the Corinthians, the Thessalonians, and all of the churches of the Gentiles to ask them to prepare this offering to be taken to Jerusalem through himself or other ministers acceptable to them. For this reason, he now says confidently in his commentary to Acts chapter 2, the very thing I was eager to do, specifically verses 7 through 10. Now, Jerome acknowledges that the Ebionim Kedoshim, the holy poor ones, is a reference to the Jewish apostles, the original Jewish disciples. Now, to be fair, even though Epiphanius and Jerome and these, what comes from who they call the church fathers and their disciples and followers, they don't believe, or better yet, they don't admit that the Ebionites and Nazarenes in their generation in the 3rd and 4th century were faithful disciples, if you will, of the apostles. They do argue that they're not faithful disciples, but they acknowledge that these terms, Ebionites and Nazarenes, clearly apply to the Jacob branch, or James as is known in our modern tongue, the brother of Yeshua's branch of the movement and Paul's branch of the movement. This is something that they acknowledge. Again, to be fair, they don't believe that the later generations are being faithful to them. They think they're the faithful disciples, and I would disagree. But let's see what Jerome says to Augustine. Now remember, this is Jerome writing to Augustine. He's in the mid-3rd century going into the 4th century. This is what he explains. He says, he lived from the year, just to have the reference, 342 to 420. He says, the matter in debate, therefore, or I should rather say your opinion regarding it, is summed up in this. So he's giving the position of what Augustine is arguing, not his position. That since the preaching of the gospel of Christ, the believing Jews do well in observing the precepts of the law, in offering sacrifices, as Paul did, in circumcising their children, as Paul did in the case of Timothy, and keeping the Jewish Sabbath, as all the Jews have been accustomed to do. And I added this portion further in his dialogue. He states this: our fathers affirmed the apostles to have done so feignedly meaning deceitfully. Jerome has the audacity to say that our beloved true fathers of the assembly, the emissaries, the apostles, pretended to keep the commandments of God in order to fool other Jews. This is the argument of all the church of Edom, the church of Esau, who hates the law of God, who hates the Jewish people. They actually believe that our leaders, the apostles, the disciples of Yeshua, only kept the law deceitfully, because they can't argue that the New Testament is very clear, especially in the book of Acts, that they all kept the law. So the only excuse they could give is that they did so deceitfully. And they would manipulate that passage where Paul says to the Jew is a Jew and a Greek is a Greek, which is completely out of context. Paul communicates to the Jew as a Jew in terms that a Jewish person would understand. And he communicates to a Greek as a Greek in terms a Greek would understand. If I'm speaking even the same language, if I'm speaking to people from the urban inner cities of America, minorities, they're going to communicate English a little bit differently than people that are from the suburbs or people that are from the country areas, the rural areas of America. They might all speak English, but they use different terms, different slang, different ideas, different culture. So if I'm going to preach Messiah to different groups of people, I'm going to adapt the message to be communicated in a way that could be understood to the person I'm speaking to. That doesn't mean I compromise the message. That would be lying. It doesn't matter what movement you belong to. Nobody respects a liar and a deceiver. So by this mentality, they themselves are showing themselves to be deceivers and liars. But let's continue with this commentary. He goes on to say, if this be true, remember, he's arguing against a sincere observance of Torah by the apostles. If this be true, we fall into the hearsay of Cerinthius and Ebionim, who though believe in Christ, were anathemized by the fathers for this one error, that they mixed up the ceremonies of the law with the gospel of Christ, and professed their faith in that which was new, without letting go what was old. Ebionim is a symbol of the Ebionites. In other words, this man is saying and confessing with his mouth that they excommunicated the Jewish followers of Yeshua, those who continue to actually live the lifestyle and the teachings that Yeshua and his apostles did. Because Yeshua and his apostles, his emissaries, his shlichim, were all zealous for the Torah. Just read Acts chapter 21, verses 17 through 24. If you don't believe me, the scriptures speak for themselves. And these men condemn themselves with their own witness, by their own words. We continue and read his testimony, or confession, I would say. Why do I speak of the Ebionites who make pretensions to the name of Christian? In our own day, there exists a sect among the Jews throughout the synagogues of the East, which is called the sect of the Minim, and even now condemned by the Pharisees. Wait, Ebionim or the Minim? Minim means Aminei Yeshua Notzri, the followers of Yeshua the Nazarene. They're calling them Minim. It's a derogatory term, meaning sectarians. So he's saying the rabbis, the offshoot of the Pharisees, refer to the Ebionites, the Ebionim, as the Minim. The adherents to this sect, meaning the followers to this sect, are commonly known as Nazarenes. So now, when we read the Birkat HaMinim, the curse that was found in the Geniza records in Egypt from the 8th to 9th century, the oldest version that we have accessible, it says a curse against the Minim and the Notzrim. In other words, the Ebionites and Nazarenes. The Ebionites being the core Orthodox Jewish followers of Yeshua, and the Nazarenes being their disciples in the diaspora, that came in through the works of Paul and Barnabas. If, however, there is for us no alternative but to receive the Jews into the church, he doesn't want to. But if there's no alternative, look what he says. Along with the usages prescribed by their law, if in short it shall be declared lawful for them to continue in the churches of Christ, he's admitting it's illegal. Get rid of the Jews. He doesn't want Jews. What does he say? It shall be declared, if it shall be declared lawful for them to continue in the churches of Christ, what they have been accustomed to practice in the synagogue of Satan. So this man who is the real synagogue of Satan, those who say they are Jews and are not, these people came up with replacement theology saying that they are the new Israel, but they are not. Read it simple. Don't make up lies and say that this group is the synagogue of Satan. The synagogue of Satan are those who are not Jews, but who are claiming the title for themselves. It could be an Anglo-British Israelite. It could be a Black Hebrew Israelite. It could be the Church of Rome. Anybody who believes in replacement theology are no different than Muslims because their faith is founded on replacement theology. They are enemies of the Israel of God. I will tell you my opinion of the matter. They will not become Christians, but they will make us Jews. Though the world were to protest against my view, I may boldly declare that the Jewish ceremonies are to Christians both hurtful and fatal. So what Yeshua did, what his apostles did is hurtful and fatal. This man is a blasphemer. Whether he be Jew or Gentile, originally is cast into the pit of perdition. Because even in the 3rd and 4th century, none of the Christians considered themselves Gentiles. They knew they were grafted in, meaning they were sojourners with Israel, but that wasn't good enough for them. They wanted to replace Israel. And the polemic, the debate really was taking place between converts under the rabbis and converts under the emissaries that were debating among themselves who were the sincere converts. The reason a Gentile like Kehila can rise up in power is because the converts were taking over. So Chrysostom and Kehila, both Gentiles, were able to debate each other and bring about this separation between real Jews, some who were followers of Yeshua and some who were not. The division began among those who were converting. That's pretty clear in the context of Galatians when you read it in a historical framework. So let's read Galatians 2:9-10. It says, for the one who was at work in Kepha's apostleship to the circumcised was also at work in my apostleship to the Gentiles. And recognizing the grace that was given to me, Yaakov and Kepha and Yochanan, who the Gentiles called Jacob, Peter, and John, those esteemed to be the pillars, gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, that we should go to the nations and they to the circumcised. Only that we should be mindful of the poor ones, the Ebionim, the very thing which I was also diligent to do. And before you come and tell me they're just looking out for random poor people, read Acts chapter 3. Read the entire book of Acts. Show me an example of them handing out money to random poor people. You won't see it. In fact, when they go to the temple, these same brethren, and a poor man asks them for money, he says, silver and gold I don't have for you. I'm not giving you money. But what I will give you is the power of healing that is given in the mighty name of Yeshua Messiah. Get up and walk. That's what they gave. So the poor is a reference, as the quote unquote church father movement followers are saying, Ebionim are those who sold their property and laid it at the apostles' feet. Do you remember what Yeshua said to a rich young ruler who said, Master, what must I do to be saved? He said, keep the commandments. Obviously, Yeshua did not agree with these heathen. And then the man responds to Yeshua and says, Master, I've done these. And Yeshua says, then you lack one thing. Sell all your property, give it to the poor, the Ebionim, and come and follow me. Now that's in the context of the first century where Yeshua was physically there. His movement was physically in Jerusalem, in the land of Israel, under their own space to be able to keep Torah in their land. Even though there was Roman oppression, there was still enough movement to be able to go and visit the synagogue or visit the community together and practice Torah together as a community. Very clear. In Luke chapter 6, and we'll go over this in the future, Yeshua picks his 12 emissaries and says, blessed are the poor. You will inherit the kingdom. Do random poor people inherit the kingdom? Those who make themselves poor for the kingdom is what he's referring to. Carrying the burden of others. That's the Torah of Messiah. Let's see what Acts 24:5 says, as mentioned before. This is the branch of Paul. The Sadducees, trying to have Paul executed, say, for we have found this man, Paul, a plague, one who stirs up riots among all the Jews throughout the world, and is the ringleader of the sect of Nazarenes. So Paul, in charge of this movement, Nazarene means an offshoot, a resurrected branch, or a guardian of something that was hidden. That's Paul's branch. But what does it say? What does Paul do? He tries to get this worldwide movement of people being restored and grafted in to send their money to Jerusalem to support the leaders, the Ebionim, the real church fathers. Romans 15:26-29 says, for it pleased those from Macedonia and in Achaia to make a certain contribution for the poor ones, the holy poor ones in Jerusalem. Do we think that poor people in other places don't matter? Couldn't they just donate to the poor people in their local communities? They're donating from their free will to the original leaders of the movement. The assembly was in Jerusalem, the Kehila, what they later translate as the church. It says, Ki Makedonia ve'Achaia ho'ilu litrom mincha la'Ebionim ha'kedoshim, to the holy poor ones. For they were willing to do it because they also are indebted to them. Are they indebted to some random poor people in Jerusalem? No, they're indebted to the apostles. Why? Keep reading. For if they have been made partners with them in the spiritual, are they partners receiving something spiritual from random poor people? It doesn't fit the context. The Gentiles are also indebted to be of service to them in the physical. Therefore, when I have completed this and have sealed to them this fruit, I will come through you, that is to Rome, into Sepharad, Spain, following the itinerary of Isaiah 66 and Obadiah. And I am sure that when I come to you, I will come in the fullness of the blessing of the good news of Messiah. This is the fullness of the nations. When they learn to reciprocate what they receive from the Jewish people, not that all Jewish people are perfect. I'm sure you can find a Jewish person that's not a good person because they're human beings like everybody else. But those who are faithful to the God of Israel and faithful in what he has called them to be, a light to the nations, and not going against the works of Messiah, because someone who goes against the work of Messiah, they're going against the very calling of God. And that is a dangerous place to be. Let's not act like it wasn't Yeshua's movement who brought the knowledge of the God of Israel to the nations. For somebody to try to take credit away from that, they put themselves on the condemnation. And where did this all begin? In our series, we were speaking of Menachem. Please go back to the first two parts of this series. Menachem was Moreh Elitzur. He was an Essene who worked with Hillel, they were the last righteous Zugot, the 𝘾𝙃, the Nasi and the 𝘾𝙃. They were the leaders of the Sanhedrin before the crooked branch of the Pharisees under Shema and the wicked Sadducees took over. And that's the problem Yeshua and his cousin Yochanan had to deal with. Let's restore the righteous leadership that was established by Hillel and Menachem. And Yeshua and Yochanan, John the Baptist, were a part of that restoration. They were the chiefs of that restoration. And this term, Ebionim, is not something new. The Dead Sea Scrolls is older than any other versions of the Bible, much older than the Masoretic text, older than the Septuagint. And what do we find in these writings of the disciples of Menachem? The real understanding of the term Ebionim, the poor ones. It says in 4Q171, based on Psalm 37:11, and the humble ones shall inherit the land and enjoy peace and plenty. Its interpretation concerns the congregation of the poor ones. Let me read this in Hebrew so you can understand. Put your ear to it. Ve'anavim yirshu eretz vehitangu al rov shalom pesharo al adat ha'evyonim. Anavim evyonim. The humble ones who inherit the earth are the Ebionim, the poor ones, the Ebionites, who will tough out a period of distress and will be rescued from the snares of Belial, the lawless one. Yeah, the same term Paul uses in his letters for the opponent, the adversary. As Psalm 37:12-13 state, the wicked plots against me, the righteous person the wicked plots against the righteous person, grinding his teeth against him. Hashem laughs at him because he sees that his day is coming. Its interpretation alludes to the ruthless ones of the covenant who are in the house of Judah, the Sadducees, the wicked priests. So they're using the term Judean, the same way the Gospel of John does, because they consider themselves the house of Israel, the unification of all the tribes and sojourners, not an elitist mentality. Let me repeat this. Its interpretation alludes to the ruthless ones of the covenant who are in the house of Judah, referring to the Sadducees, who plot to destroy the doers of the Torah. Let me read that in Hebrew for you. It says, Pesharo al 𝙁𝙧𝙗 berit asher bebeit Yehuda asher yazumu lichlot et osei haTorah, the doers of the Torah, who are in the council of the Yachad, but God will not surrender them into their hands. We'll continue this study and see where the renewed covenant uses the terms poor ones, doers of the Torah, sons of light, those of the renewed covenant, those of the way, all the terms of the Menachem movement, and Hillel, because there were righteous Pharisees as well, like Joseph of Arimathea, and as we see others, Nicodemus, Gamaliel. There was a remnant, and we are their witnesses. We are the disciples of Yeshua Messiah in these last days, bringing the restoration, because we choose to be allowed by his Spirit to bring this word to you. Be a part of this. Get out of the wickedness of the nations and the Greco-Roman counterfeit, who is raising its head with the satanic lie of replacement theology. They will be reunified with their masters in Islam. Remember, Muhammad and the Catholic Church, they're all together. I know it's a tough word, and we love our brothers and sisters that are followers of Messiah in every denomination. But if you don't adhere to the teachings of Messiah and receive correction, judgment is coming. We are in the last days. Return to the roots of the faith. Stand with the people of Israel in the mighty name of Yeshua. Shalom Aleichem.
למנצח אל שושנים, עדות לאסף מזמור. רועי ישראל האזיננו, כצאן יוסף יושב הקרדין הופיע, לפני אפרים ובנימין ומנשה, עוררה את גבורתך ולך לישועתה לנו. אלוהים השיבנו, והאר פניך וניוושע.